Hey, it's Sarah, juror number 11 from the Sequestered podcast. Here's exciting news. Dateline NBC has just released a new episode titled The Pin at Apartment 210. In this episode, Dateline correspondent Blaine Alexander explores the investigation, the trial, and the key moments that define the search for justice in the murder of Jasmine Pace. If you've been listening to Sequestered, you know how personal this case became for me. I had the opportunity to briefly share about my experience as a juror in this episode, and I feel incredibly honored to be a part of something that helps amplify Jasmine's story on a national level. This episode isn't about the trial or the jurors. It's about Jasmine, her voice, her family, and the lasting impact of what happened. Now streaming on Peacock, you can watch this episode of Dateline tonight or anytime you want. So check it out and help us continue to honor Jasmine Pace's memory. Go to peacocktv.com to start your free trial. Hey everyone, welcome to this special bonus episode of Sequestered. I'm Sarah, and this is my co-producer, Andrea.
Hey everyone, whether you've been with us since the very beginning or just found us thanks to Dateline or the Apple Podcast feature, we're so glad you're here.
Yes, this has been a wild few months, hasn't it?
It has.
We've heard from so many of you, listeners and journalists and survivors.
Yes.
Even people connected to the trial. And we've realized there were still a few stories left to tell. Things that didn't quite make it into the main episodes and moments we just wanted to sit with a little longer.
So today's episode is a bit different. Just the two of us having a candid conversation. And we'll reflect on the making of the podcast. We'll share some behind the scenes moments. And we'll talk about what it was like to be a part of Dateline. We'll even explore a few case details that didn't make it into season 1.
Yes, and a heads up, you'll also hear us refer to Jasmine as Jazzy throughout the episode. That's what her friends and family called her, and in the courtroom, we really only knew her as Jasmine. So now that we've spent so much time with her story, we want to think of her as Jazzy too.
So grab a coffee, take a walk, settle in, whatever you do while you listen, and join us for this behind the mic conversation about Sequestered and Jazzy and everything in between.
Okay, let's start at the beginning. How this whole thing came to be.
Yeah. So while the trial unfolded in the courtroom, another story was quietly being formed in the background, and that was the story of how we'd eventually tell it.
Right. Okay, and to be honest, I didn't exactly set out to become a juror or a true crime podcaster for that, but here we are. Okay, so let's talk about how Sequestered came to life. Like, what surprised us most while creating it and how it's changed us along the way.
Okay, great. I mean, it's one thing to say, like, this should be a podcast, and another thing to make it as quickly as we did. That's the first thing that comes to mind.
Right.
Like, what made this release so unique was that we had to move fast.
Yeah.
We committed early on to the writing and producing of the podcast in real time in order to capture the details and emotions of your experience while it was still fresh.
Right.
So we started basically as soon as you got back.
Right. Yeah. And what surprised me was how much I was still carrying, like, after those 10 days in Chattanooga.
Right.
I saw and heard things in the courtroom that I hadn't obviously not even begun to process yet.
Yeah.
But once you and I started mapping out the episodes, it became super clear that this wasn't going to just be about the trial. Like, I wanted to tell Jasmine's story.
Yes. That was something we committed to from the very start. We didn't want this to feel like any sensationalized true crime thing.
Right.
We wanted to honor Jazzy's life first, but we also wanted to show like what it feels like to carry the responsibility of a juror on a murder trial deciding someone else's fate.
Yeah. And that's a tricky balance, I would say.
Yeah.
We wanted to be honest, obviously, but not exploitative.
Yeah.
We wanted to be detailed, but not graphic just for the sake of it.
Right.
Like there were a lot of moments where you and I had to pause and say, is this respectful?
Yeah.
Does this serve the story, or is it just our curiosity, you know?
Right. Like that was something we came across a lot of times, is how do we tell this part of the story?
Right. And now seeing this story land on Dateline and being featured on Apple Podcasts, it's kind of surreal. Like we made this in a tiny room with one microphone, a lot of coffee, and a whole bunch of all-nighters.
That's true.
It's wild, and it's just emotional, because the more attention the podcast gets, the more I think about Jasmine's mom and her family and the ripple effect this case had on the community. And I don't know. I just hope we did her justice.
Oh, I think you did. And the response from listeners shows that people are connecting to your voice, to your honesty, and most of all, to Jasmine's story.
Yeah.
So fast forward a few months after we launched the podcast, then came Dateline.
Yeah. That was not something I saw coming. One minute I'm editing in my office, and the next thing I know, I'm sitting across from Dateline producers with cameras and lights in a retro hotel, being asked to talk about one of the most intense experiences of my life.
That's true.
I think what struck me the most was how much the Dateline team genuinely cared about honoring Jasmine's life.
Yeah.
Like they didn't just want the crime details, you know? They wanted to understand the people at the heart of it.
Yeah, I remember talking to a couple of the producers, and it really felt like they had theories of their own that they wanted to discuss with us.
Right.
So did being a part of that Dateline episode bring you any kind of closure, or did it reopen things?
Sort of both. There was a part of me that felt really proud. Like, okay, this story matters. People are listening.
Yeah.
But it also stirred stuff up, you know, like seeing crime scene photos again.
And yet here you are, again, still telling Jazzy's story.
Right, because she deserves it.
Yeah.
So I guess here's a good place to say, if you haven't seen the Dateline episode about Jasmine Pace yet, it's called The Pin at Apartment 210, and you can see it at DatelineNBC.com or on Peacock.
Okay, so let's shift gears and talk about something we really haven't explored in depth, what it's actually like to be inside that jury room.
Yeah.
And even just like living in the headspace that you were in for 10 days.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to describe, but I'm sure everyone can imagine, like you're cut off from everything, your phone, the news, social media, like your people. And during the day, you're absorbing hours and hours of testimony. And then at night, you're just alone with it in the silence of your room.
Right. That's what I've always wondered. And we had a lot of people write in about that. When you went back to your hotel room each night, you were replaying that testimony, or were you just so completely wiped that you were like, I need to rest because they're knocking on my door at 6 a.m.?
Yeah. Probably both again. Some nights I'd crash like the second I'd hit the bed, just mentally drained from like listening to the intensity of it all.
Yeah.
But other nights I couldn't turn it off. Like I'd replay certain witness moments over and over, and I'd hear Jasmine's mom's voice or the medical examiner's tone or just something Jason's defense said that didn't sit right with me, you know?
Right.
And there was just no way not to carry it with me.
Yeah, I can't imagine. That makes sense. And I know you've said before, but it was hard not to look at Jason during those days. Did you and Jason ever make eye contact?
Yeah, a couple of times. Well, I mean, I would say several times.
Wow.
There were definitely times even during like jury selection in Nashville and multiple times during the trial that we made eye contact because of my seating position in the jury box. Mm-hmm. It was always very obvious, like when I would look at him, because I had to physically turn my head to the left to see him.
Oh, I see.
Like to see him or the courtroom. And it wasn't like I could just glance across the room at him.
Yeah.
So when I turned, we couldn't help but make eye contact.
Wow. That had to feel intense.
Yeah, it was weird.
Just the idea of like knowing you're sitting in the same room as someone who's admitted to murdering someone.
Yeah.
And then there's that moment you talk about in the podcast where the medical examiner, Dr. Coswell, was on the stand.
Mm-hmm.
There were really graphic photos being shown, and you noticed Jason was looking down.
Right.
But then you realized something else. Can you share more about that?
Yeah, I know I talked a little bit about this in the podcast. At first, I thought, okay, maybe he can't even look at what he did, or like maybe he's ashamed, or even maybe like he was instructed not to look up at the projector screens.
Yeah.
When like graphic photos were shown, just, I don't know, out of reverence or whatever. So his head was down the entire time. But then I noticed there was this like monitor built into the table that he was sitting at. So it was like a glass tabletop and this kind of monitor like mounted underneath. And I was so curious about it throughout the trial, but again, if I turn my head to the left,
yeah,
he's going to see me looking at him. So I just didn't want to do that. So I didn't know until after the trial was over. I texted the bailiff kind of while making this podcast. And that's when he confirmed that every time an image was projected on the screen, it would also be projected on the screens in front of him.
In front of Jason Chen.
Right, in front of Jason Chen at his desk.
Wow.
So he was actually seeing the images that we were seeing the whole time, probably more defined than even what we were seeing.
Oh my gosh. That is crazy to realize that.
Right.
From the live stream, when I was watching the trial, you could only see that his head was down. I didn't realize there were monitors. So
right.
I thought that maybe his defense had said, make it look this way.
Yeah, convenient, right?
Yeah, that's the thing most people don't realize is being on a jury, it's not just facts and timelines and things like that. It's about human behavior. I mean,
right. Yeah.
Obviously, you want to make decisions based on the evidence, but, things like that, noticing the eye contact, the body language, you had to kind of keep track of all of it.
Right, absolutely. And they were keeping track of our energy, our eye contact, our body language, everyone else in the courtroom.
Yeah.
And for them, we had to keep track of that every day, not just because we had to make a decision, but once you're in that room, you feel the weight of that responsibility. So you just want to get it right.
Yeah. And I think you did.
I think we did too.
Talking about Jason and how he interacted with those crime scene photos in the courtroom leads us into something we've been sitting with for a while. And honestly, it's haunted both of us since we learned about it.
Yeah, this is something that didn't come up in the trial, but we found out about later. And that is that investigators discovered several photos on Jason Chen's phone of a very specific art piece that he took while he was on a trip in DC visiting the Smithsonian. So I looked it up. The piece is called The Birth of Eve, and it's by an artist named Judith Schechter. She's a stained glass artist from Philadelphia who's completely redefined the medium. It's actually really beautiful. Her work uses the visual language of Gothic cathedrals, like stuff you'd see in old churches. But instead of saints or angels, she explores pain, emotion, and isolation. It's really raw. Mm-hmm. So this piece is part of the permanent collection at the Smithsonian if you ever find yourself there. It depicts a nude woman suspended upside down and is curled tightly in the fetal position. Her arms and legs are pulled in close, almost like she's being held or confined by something invisible. It's deeply unsettling.
I agree.
So here's how this whole art piece connects to Jason Chen. And again, this was never part of the trial, but once I saw it and knowing Jason had several images of it saved in his phone, it was really hard not to compare it with the crime scene photos we saw.
I mean, that's crazy if that's true.
I know. So whether it was conscious or not, it's something I've not been able to stop thinking about, like the positioning, the stillness, the compression of her body. It mirrored the art piece so closely, and seeing it just still makes my stomach turn.
And we want to be clear, this is speculation, but when we found about this art piece, it was so hard to not make that connection.
Right.
And it wasn't a part of the trial, and we're not saying it proves anything, but it is one of those details that just feels too strange to ignore.
Exactly. And I don't think it's about proving a motive. It's more like understanding that there may have been like layers and layers to this case that just went unseen in the court, like this.
Yeah, exactly.
And, okay, so now that leads us to a few more loose threads that we haven't been able to let go of. These also didn't make it into the trial, but they did stick with us.
Which is why we're so grateful to have the chance to sit down with the two people who know this case inside and out, District Attorneys General Coty Wamp and Paul Moyle.
Yep, they were the ones who brought this case to trial, who carried Jazzy's story into that courtroom, and who fought for justice on behalf of her family. We had a chance to talk with them about the trial, about their reflections, and about some of the unanswered questions we've been wrestling with too. And one of the first things that we talked with them about was the fact that as jurors, we were allowed to ask questions. This is something that a lot of people were surprised by when they heard about it on the podcast.
Yeah, we got so many messages about that. Like, wait, jurors were able to ask questions to the witnesses?
Yeah, I actually loved it. And later I learned that it's actually pretty rare. It's allowed in the state of Tennessee. I guess it just depends on the judge. So here's what DAs Wamp and Moyle had to say about it. If you've been following the podcast, we've got something new for you. Now you can dive even deeper into each episode on our website, SEQUESTEREDPod.com. We've added exclusive blogs for every episode, packed with extra details, behind-the-scenes insights, and key moments from the trial. Plus, we've organized all the trial and news coverage by each day of the trial, so you can follow along just like we did in the jury room. Head over to SEQUESTEREDPod.com now to explore the case in a whole new way.
And that's one of the pros.
Yeah.
There's pros and cons to a jury being able to ask questions. One is you know what they're thinking and you know what direction they're going in.
Right.
You know what issues they're having with the case. What do they keep focusing on? There's cons as well. First of all, y'all didn't know that it was going to be such a lengthy trial, so you're wanting the evidence from this witness when it's not coming in through this witness, coming in through another witness. So jurors have a tendency to maybe get ahead of themselves, and so we're sort of wasting time with these questions because we're going to answer these questions for you. If they can be answered, we're going to answer them, So there's pros and cons amongst both the defense bar and my office for jury questions. We only have one judge here who does jury questions, and that's Judge Patterson. And I think at first we were all very nervous about these questions because it just started 2.5 years ago when he became the judge. But over time, it only probably has helped us. Honestly, it's not harmed us. It doesn't hurt, know, and sometimes there's a question that we did not think of. And, so many of y'all's questions were asked, meaning that that's a question that we didn't think of and we didn't even know would be important, but it was for some reason. And so I think looking back, I originally was opposed to the questions, and now it doesn't hurt us if juries like it the way that now we're hearing that juries like being able to ask those questions. We also have a concern that we don't want a juror to use it against either party if their question's not asked. Or think that someone's hiding the ball. You have a question's really significant to you. For some reason, the court doesn't ask it. I wouldn't want anybody to think, well, why are they not answering the question? What are they hiding? Because that's normally just not the case at all. So we have those concerns. But overall, and in this, I've never seen a jury ask as many questions as y'all asked.
Really?
Yeah. There was probably a couple times up there where I turned around and rolled my eyes because I'm like, these questions are...
I can see that because some of them were very detailed.
Some of them were so detailed, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. And it's if a juror wants those questions answered, that's great. That's what's important to them, and that's what we need to know. But it is like you spend a day with someone on the witness stand, and then the jury has 29 questions.
So do you guys together, does everyone have to unanimously agree? We
can object.
Okay.
So there were times where Josh would have objected and said we don't, and then the court has to decide. Most of them we agreed on.
Okay.
Most of them is very clear it's an appropriate question or not an appropriate question. so many of them were going to be answered down the road.
And I feel like he made that really clear. Like, we may not answer it. Don't take it personal.
Mm-hmm.
Also, it could be presented at a later time. I think the thing that was helpful for us was because we couldn't talk about it or discuss the case throughout. That was our only opportunity to have
See what everyone was thinking.
Okay, let me just get this thought out of my head versus waiting until deliberation and going, maybe it took less time to deliberate because of that.
That's
because
interesting.
We were able to.
That's a very interesting
You know what I mean?
perspective.
Yeah, I appreciate that. There's definitely pros and cons
I
to
could
questions.
totally see
And
that.
for a prosecutor, it's
It's
nerve-wracking because sometimes I don't want to know what the jury's thinking.
course.
I'd rather not know what the jury's
that's
thinking.
fair. Totally
So
fair.
it's nerve-wracking
That's
Absolutely.
because there were times in that trial where he and I would walk back to the table and we would be like, that was a bad question. The fact that one of the jurors is still like focused on something like that, and you know, we'd be sitting there like, that is bad, that's not good for
Probably
us.
That gets in your head too.
And
a little.
and by the end of the day, you're like, but three of those jurors are still focused on this, but y'all also had this story in your head the whole time about Tinder and a fight with wine glasses.
Oh yeah, we were trying to prove it.
And that's one reason by the end of it where I'm so frustrated because throughout the trial, you guys are thinking, and some of your questions reflected that. When are we going to hear about this?
It's like you said in your closing, like it was all muddy the water, like just to confuse us.
And I think some of the questions reflected that. But no, looking back, and I would tell Judge Patterson this: if juries appreciate him, and if he appreciates them, you can allow it in the state of Tennessee. So I'm fine with it. We've gotten used to it now, and
It's great. I loved how seriously they took the jurors' questions. Like, they didn't just tolerate them, you know, like they welcomed them.
Yeah.
And from our perspective, I think it made us feel seen, like our confusion and our curiosity wasn't just background noise, you know?
Yeah.
Like it was part of the process. I'd even argue that it helped the process. And I don't know, I just think it was a really cool opportunity.
Yeah. And then we asked them what stood out to them in the trial itself, like what moments stuck with them or surprised them or challenged them.
Yeah, and I think this is where it got emotional because they talked about Jasmine and her family, and it was really clear that they weren't just trying a case, you know, like they were carrying the weight of someone's life.
I think such an example of that from this trial when it was a little bit early on to really hit home for the jury because Katrina was our first witness, but how identical she looks to her daughter.
So much.
Always, and I mean, always stood out to me as like, oh my gosh, she is up there on the witness stand. She looks exactly like her daughter. We're going to show her driver's license so that you can see, but they are real people. And they have moms that sometimes look just like them that are willing to testify on their behalf. And so, I mean, what a moment. Y'all didn't know as much about the case at that point in time because she was our first witness, but looking back, I mean,
His
mother looks exactly like her daughter who's this has happened to. And I thought honestly, I think it's a sweet moment for me to see her on the stand. And what a mom, what a mom. Katrina Bean is the mom that we all aspire to be. And so I thought that was a sweet moment.
I also thought it was so powerful as someone who was watching the trial real time to see Jasmine's mom as the first witness on the stand, because not only did she look like Jasmine, it was sort of a representation of her, but she really was able to explain the panic that a mother or a parent would have when they're trying to find their daughter, which helped explain why they broke into Jason Chen's apartment.
Right. Yeah, I know. It reminded me that everyone in the courtroom was carrying something with regards to this.
Yeah.
And like for them, it wasn't just about putting Jason Chen on trial.
Right.
This was about making sure Jasmine's voice didn't get lost in the legal process.
Yeah. And I feel like both General Wamp and DA Paul Moyle, they saw you and the other jurors as part of that process. And they were counting on you guys to hold that weight alongside of them.
I totally agree. And we felt the weight of that every day.
Yeah, I imagine.
Okay, the last thing we talked about with DAs Wamp and Moyle was the appeal Jason Chen's legal team filed to challenge the verdict. The appeal was filed on the grounds that the verdict was, quote, contrary to the evidence, with claims that Chen was denied a fair trial due to alleged evidence being tampered with by Jasmine's family. As of the release of this episode, there have been no publicly reported updates regarding his appeal, which was scheduled for April 11th, 2025.
Yeah, there's a lot of confusion around what an appeal actually means. So we asked them to explain it in plain terms and to share what this particular appeal might involve.
A motion for new trial is filed in every single case after every single trial.
Standard,
Standard.
Okay.
You have to argue the motion for new trial before you can go through the actual Court of Appeals process. Very standard formality. There are some cases in which there can be significant issues. Most often there's not, because you're having, the judge that's reviewing the motion for new trial is Judge Patterson. He was there for the trial. So for a judge to grant a new trial, often they would have to admit that they made a ruling that they now believe was incorrect. And so it very, very rarely happens that a new trial is granted. I've seen one here granted in the last, maybe two in the last 5 to 10 years.
Wow.
And so, everybody's like, oh, he wants a new trial. How dare him? And this is what happens.
That's what we thought.
It's no big deal. So as soon as it's argued and we don't believe there will be any issues whatsoever, then it's in the hands of the Court of Appeals. This probably would never go to the Supreme Court because the issues are just not big enough. And it'll be done in a couple of years.
Yeah.
So to be clear, an appeal is not a new trial. It is not about re-arguing the facts of the case. It's a legal review to determine whether anything was done improperly or unfairly in the process.
And from what we understand, this isn't uncommon at all. It's just the next step.
Right. It doesn't make it easier, though.
Yeah.
For Jasmine's family, for the jurors, for anyone who's lived this story, I think it just brings it all back up.
Right.
But the DA's made it clear they stand by the work they've done, and so do I, honestly.
Yeah.
Okay, let's answer some unanswered questions and theories.
Okay, great.
Even with a guilty verdict and an appeal, there are still things about this case that don't quite sit right with us. Like little details that weren't part of the courtroom evidence, but stuck with us anyway.
Yeah, and making this podcast, we ended up hearing from a lot of people. Friends, family members, even folks who were quietly observing from the sidelines.
Mm-hmm.
And a few of them shared things that raised new questions.
Mm-hmm. One of the questions we kept coming back to had to do with Jason Chen's movements the day he drove from his parents' home in Nolensville, Tennessee, back to Chattanooga.
Yeah.
So this would have been November 26th, 2022, which is also the same day his apartment would have been searched.
Yeah.
If you remember from the trial, phone records showed that he never actually went back to his apartment. He was just in the area. His phone pinged near it at a park nearby, but he never entered his apartment complex again. Instead, those same records showed that he drove north up into the Hickson area. And that always stood out to us. Like, why did he go up there? What's in Hickson?
Yeah. And we know by this point that investigator Crawford has left Jason Chen a voicemail.
Right.
So we started wondering, was he looking for police activity, like scoping out the area around his apartment, or maybe even looking, like you said, where Jasmine lived?
Right.
So we end up following the trail. But before we go there, here's a moment from episode 6.
We know from investigator Crawford's testimony that the search warrant for Jason Chen's apartment was granted at 11:45 p.m. that same night. So what was Jason back in town for? Surely by now, investigator Crawford had already been calling his phone. Was he curious about any activity around his apartment, checking to see if the police were already involved? Or was there something else pulling him back? Then, Hamilton reveals another twist. Jason leaves the North Shore area around 9:30 p.m., heading towards Hickson, a community just north of Chattanooga. And according to his phone records, Jason stays in the Hickson area until about 10:15 p.m. before heading back to Nolensville. So what's in Hickson? Jasmine's house. Her family's house. What in the world was Jason doing there? And more importantly, why? So as it turns out, he was at a car wash.
Right.
Which I guess makes sense, but also it still feels a little eerie, like knowing what happened.
Yeah.
It's the kind of detail that doesn't necessarily prove anything, but it adds to the picture. Like, what was his state of mind? What was he thinking?
Right. And the interesting part is that we did see the tire tread in the back of his trunk.
Right.
But he never opened his trunk to notice kind of the treads of the suitcase.
Right. Yeah. I remember talking about that too. Like why not open the trunk and wipe that down real quick? If that liner in the back of his trunk was so clean otherwise. I mean, it looked practically brand new aside from the 2 wheel marks from the suitcase.
Right. And then there's the mystery of the dropped pen. We had a conversation with someone who was with Jasmine at the hospital with her granny earlier. Remember, her granny died the same day that she went missing.
Right.
So Jasmine was at the hospital. This person saw her on that same day, November 22nd.
Mm-hmm.
They told us that Jasmine was wearing her Apple Watch that day because they commented on her new watch band.
Right.
So their theory is it's possible that Jazzy used her Apple Watch to drop the location pin to her mom instead of her phone that night.
Mm-hmm. And so we mentioned this theory to DAs Wamp and Moyle, and both of them noted that the Apple Watch has never been found.
Wow.
And for what it's worth, this also wasn't mentioned in the trial, so we don't know if Jason took it or destroyed it or if it's still out there somewhere. But one thing we do know is that pin solved her murder.
Yes, exactly. We wanted to include this because we know our listeners are as curious as we are. So if you have any theories of your own about this case and we haven't covered them, please send them our way.
Yes, please do. You can email us at sequesteredpod@gmail.com. And trust me when I say we read everything.
All right, Sarah, before we wrap this up, we just want to take a moment to reflect on this wild ride and what's ahead.
Yeah. Wow. I don't think I ever imagined how big this would get. I've seriously been blown away by the response.
Yeah, me too.
Like by how people have listened and reached out and shared their own stories. Like the support from both listeners and media has been just overwhelming in the best way, wouldn't you say?
I agree. What started as like dreaded jury duty for you turned into something that's now helping people understand the justice system and also kind of the emotional weight that comes with being a part of it.
Yeah, that's cool. And through it all, like what I keep coming back to is Jasmine.
Right.
Like I hope people remember her name.
Yes.
Jasmine Pace, or Jazzy, as her friends and family called her. She just had an unwavering love and a vibrant spirit, and a family that just fought so fiercely to find her and make sure justice was served.
Yeah, exactly. That's what this podcast has always been about, remembering the people at the center of these stories, not just the crime, not the perpetrator, but the life that was lost. And in this case, that's Jasmine Pace.
Right. Okay, so as for what's next, there's more to come.
Yes.
While the odds of me being sequestered again are highly unlikely, I am not done telling these stories. There are too many lives that have ended far too soon and just too many questions still looming in the dark. We're already working on our next case, and we've got a few ideas brewing, but we also want to hear from you.
Yeah, if there's a case you think we should look into, something local, something overlooked, something that really has stuck with you, again, please email us at sequesteredpod@gmail.com, or you can hit us up on Instagram.
And if this podcast has meant something to you, if Jazzy's story has stayed with you, please take a moment to rate and review the show. It might seem small, but it actually helps more than you think.
Yeah, those reviews tell those algorithm gods that people care, and that helps new listeners find Sequestered. It's one of the best ways we can keep Jasmine's story and the stories we'll cover next, reaching the people who need to hear them.
Also, stay subscribed. We'll be dropping more bonus episodes with updates, thoughts, and anything we feel you should know as new information surfaces.
And before we go, we just want to send so much love to Jasmine's family. You are the reason justice happened, and we're holding you close in our hearts.
It's true. So many of the comments from listeners are sending your family their love and reassurance that Jasmine's name will never be forgotten. Thanks to all of you for being here, for listening, and for remembering Jazzy with us.
Stay safe, stay curious, and we'll see you next time.
This is a BP production. The show is written, edited, and produced by me, Sarah Reed, with co-production by Andrea Clyde. Music and sound design are curated to reflect the gravity and sensitivity of this story, and with the intent to honor Jasmine, her family, and the community affected by her death. For more information or to connect with us, visit sequesteredpod.com or follow us on Instagram at sequesteredpod.